Welcome back in, everybody. Another edition here of Coach's Corner on the Auburn Undercover podcast with former Auburn DC Ellis Johnson and publisher Ronnie Sanders. And my name is Nathan King. Ellis, I mean, you look at, we're obviously coming out of a bye week for Auburn, heading into the last 3 games of the season. Technically, they can still make a bowl game, but 3-6 is obviously not where you want to be. And the Vanderbilt game, we can talk about that a little bit. But I mean, just how difficult is it for a coach and for a coaching staff when you turn the page to November, and not that there's nothing to play for, because absolutely there's, you still want to win these games. You still have a rival on your schedule, and you can still technically make a bowl game. But does that just kind of ramp up a little bit this time of year in terms of trying to get guys to continue to fight, or is that maybe a little bit of an overblown narrative when it comes to
No, it is very difficult, and it's just really hard. The things that people never see are when coaches are trying to deal with a football team after a big loss or a season like this one that's gone. And like I say, they mathematically still got something to play for, but the odds of them beating Alabama and even pulling another one, they're very slim. And I have been in that situation before. And what compounds it makes it even worse for Auburn, this is a program that's used to going to bowls. When I got to Alabama, I went to Alabama, came to Clemson, went back to Alabama. When I got there, they'd been hurt worse by that NCAA probation than they realized it with the scholarship cuts. And we were not an Alabama football team, but you couldn't tell those kids that. And so as we went through it, I mean, we lost to Louisiana Tech 1 game at home. We lost to Central Florida 1 game at home. And we were just not a good football team. We weren't as bad as we were playing, but the reason we weren't playing well because you couldn't convince those kids that they better take on a blue collar approach because they weren't going to win ball games on a 5-star, 4-star go-kart. I mean, it was really hard. And then the 4th year, on the second time I was there, was the year that Mike was told before the season ended they're not going to keep him. And he stayed through the season and coached it. There's no right decision on that, whether you stay or you let the head coach go. There's no right decision. Now, what I do recall about that is all our kids got fired up on the Auburn week, and they practiced hard and they tried to play hard. But it was a decent game. If y'all remember, Ronnie Brown had a big game. It was raining and everything. We couldn't hardly tackle it, but it was a good game compared to some we played that year. But yes, it is hard when a team at a school that is used to going to bowls and used to being in the picture of a conference championship or a national championship, and then you have a season like that. It is a tough job with the players.
Ellis, we had the same thing at Florida. When we got down there, Spurrier, they won 11 games the year before. But we walk in and, he's on record as saying the cover was a little bit bare. Hell, it was a lot bare. I mean, but you try to go in that locker room and you hit the nail on the head. They still think they're Florida, but we didn't have Florida players. And so, trying to convince Ron coming in there and talking to the locker room and talking about blue collar and, we're the underdog. Those kids didn't want to hear that because and you work for Spurrier. I mean, that's not what he was about, but that's kind of team we were.
That's right.
But you couldn't convince those kids of that.
Yeah. You try to come in behind Bob Stoops and coach defense, or even Spurrier, who coached offense, and especially the way Coach Spurrier, he could play with some average players in some spots, and he knew how to cover them up a little bit. I know sometimes in South Carolina we didn't have the kind of lineman going to knock anybody off the ball, but they could pass block a little bit, and he would run draws and draw fake and throw off of it and things of that nature where they had some help, where they weren't always trying to manhandle somebody. But if you put in a power football scheme and then try to throw in the pocket and protect the quarterback and so forth, especially if your receiver level dropped just a little bit, I could see where that would happen. But it's hard. And again, it's harder when it's a program that's used to going to bowls and playing for championships.
How difficult is it recruiting wise when you're losing? I know you sell playing time, but if you go 3-9 or 4-8, how does that affect your class?
I'm not going to say it doesn't affect it a whole lot, but people would be surprised, at least my experience with it. losing does not scare off kids all the time. Now, if you start losing and it starts looking like the rumors and at least some of the believable rumors is that the coaches are going to get fired, then kids will sometimes pull back because they wanted to play for a certain coordinator who runs a scheme, or they like the position coach that they'd met and wanted to play for him, and they, or even the head coach, and this is one of the main three reasons I'm going is because of the staff. Then you got some problems, but just losing amazingly, it doesn't really affect a lot of times because kids that are being recruited, they think they're better than the kids you got. It's the competitiveness in a kid, and you don't want to recruit them if they're not that way. They frankly are not as good, but they might be as good later. But you want them to think they are, and so they think they'll go in and beat somebody out and get started sooner. But it's amazing. I mean, it's a factor, but it's not nearly as big, I don't think, as people would think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we were, my experience was when we weren't very good, we used it as a selling point. Hey, especially the receivers at Florida, we'd go recruit those guys. Remember Chad Jackson and all those guys. I mean, we know he was in Tuscaloosa. You wouldn't get a kid out of Tuscaloosa now, but we did then. But I mean, we sold those kids. Hey, you can come in and play now. I mean, look at these guys playing. I mean, they can't play.
That's right. And if you're recruiting against another team's having a great year, y'all just pull out their depth chart and say, look at these guys. It's going to take you 2 years to break in.
Mm-hmm.
How important is, you mentioned, because now we're getting to the point where, not rumors, and because Hugh Freeze isn't getting fired this year. I think all of us are in agreement that that's not happening with the way they're recruiting. And they knew this was going to be a long-term build, but in your experience as a coach, I mean, I guess there's just not really much you can do to combat, other than win football games. There's really not much you can do to combat rumors and rumblings and stuff like that. But I mean, because I personally, the reason I bring this up, I've just been impressed with how well their class is stuck together. Auburn's class is still positioned to be in the top 5, even though they're about to have a 4-8 season.
Right. I don't keep up with recruiting anymore. And so you guys will know a lot better than I would. But usually if you lose a big timer, it'll even be on the ESPN headlines, for a day or so. And I haven't seen it either. And it's one of the highest rated classes in the country, last time I heard. So yeah, evidently it's not spooking kids. And I think unless something happens that we're not expecting to happen, and I think Auburn would make a big mistake if they tried to implement changes. I personally don't want to see a bunch of changing on his staff. Unless he knows he's got some problems that we can't see. I mean, that's his authority. But I don't see any need to start, blaming coaches for this. They're not making plays at critical times, and those recruiting classes are going to be the problem. Are going to be the answer to the problem, not bringing in 2 more new coaches. So I hope it has stability because I think it'll be the best route to take.
And he reorganized the staff last year, and I think I think he is more comfortable with the guys that he's got around him. Now Derek Nix will be an interesting case. We both know a lot about Southern Miss. I mean, it sounds like he is a candidate down there. I'm not sure if he can get the job, but losing him would certainly have an effect at all.
Yeah, I think he had a more experienced coordinator before he brought Derek in. But we all know Derek had been with him long enough to understand what he wants. And I think he wanted to put his hands back on the wheel a little bit more and the play calling and everything. And so that was a good change, I think. They functioned well on offense. They just do things like fumble the ball or drop passes, and then a quarterback will make a really bad decision with the ball late. And I'm not saying coaching doesn't have anything to do with it, but you can't sit there and say, the coach told him to throw it to the wrong guy. They don't tell them that in meetings. Okay, they're well coached. So I think coaching stability, both staff and the head coach in this situation, to me is going to be the best path to take.
What do you do with a quarterback? And you've seen Peyton Thorne play. What do you do with a quarterback that he's clearly not dumb? He's a smart kid, but continues to make really bad decisions at very inopportune times. What do you do?
Well, I mean, if it can't be corrected, then I think you got to make a change. Now, in case of, I've seen a lot of really smart kids, and things don't click fast. They're analytical, and then quarterbacks' decisions, they don't sit down and think about it for a couple hours. I mean, it's over if you had to think about it. So it doesn't necessarily mean he's a prototype quarterback for a huge system. And I think that, having coached against him, in my opinion, that system, it's not a lot of predetermined routes that you're going to throw off of timing and play action. I mean, there's some of them, but a lot of it is things that he's got to really, he's got to see things get the ball out of his hands. Because a lot of times I don't see a lot of anything but 5-man protections, and backs are not being kept in, and tight ends are not being kept in. I mean, it's a pretty wide open thing when they start throwing the football. And I think they slowed down a little bit this year, but he's always been a pace guy. And you got a pace approach. You better have a quarterback that can handle that. I use an example, the kid at Clemson when he was a little younger. Clemson, I mean, statistically this year he's lighting it up, but they're not going quite as fast as they used to. But he didn't handle that real well last year. And when you speeded it up, it might have been what the coach wanted, but sometimes his decision making, that's when he made his mistake. That's when he misread the RPO. That's when he, threw a ball somewhere in the coverage. That's when he did something else to drop the snap or, mishandle the ball. So it's not always the best thing for a kid to be smart if he can't make quick decisions. But what I remember Hugh Freeze's system and trying to defend it, I don't think he's a great fit. I think Peyton Thorne could be a really good quarterback. Might have been good if he didn't come from Michigan.
Michigan State.
Michigan State. I mean, he might be a better player in their offense. I don't know what they run, but DJ Ungale, who left Clemson, had a good year out at Washington State. It was a whole different type system. So I don't know. That's how it strikes me. And you got to go pay $1 million to get one. I'd get in the portal and find one if they don't have one that's sitting over there waiting.
What do you make of the portal in that some places like Ole Miss and Kiffin have done a terrific job managing the portal, and he's on the verge of third 10-win season in 4 years, which is almost impossible to do at Ole Miss. And then you turn around and you look at Florida State last year versus the disaster that's happened this year. How do you keep that from happening in this environment?
Yep. Every one of these little talk shows or radio things I call in, that's always comes up. And it's the same things you've already mentioned. You can find an example like an Ole Miss. You can find an example like Florida State. You can find a guy doing it the way Dabo's doing it, who's not winning like him, and you tell him you better get in the portal. They keep telling Dabo every time he loses the ball game, they keep telling him you better get in the portal. And the guys that he has got have already won 6 or 7 games. 3 weeks ago, they had a bowl. Okay, so I don't know. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. I personally wouldn't mind coaching with the NILs, but I wouldn't want to coach with the portal. I think it's a bad way to try to build a team. Basketball, no problem. Baseball, no problem. Football's different, and it's it's bad for Florida State, and I'll bet some of it is most they couldn't have screen these kids. Look, the pros do it. Y'all know this. The scouts come around. They do everything with these kids, but get the proctologist in there to check them.
That's right.
And these college coaches are buying players off of film. They don't know these kids unless they happen to have recruited them 2 years earlier. So you buy a kid from somewhere across country and he looks great on film. You never met his parents. You never talked to the family. You never did recruit him in the first place. I mean, you might be buying a recap. You might not be buying a brand new tire. It's just, I don't know. I think the whole thing is absolutely stupid. But as long as they got the money to go buy them, that's what's going to happen. And the rules, I don't think you could play at the very top for championships if you don't use the portal a little bit. And I don't think you can stay successful year after year if you live in the portal. For example, I think Ole Miss, what Lane better have somebody thinking about in there already is what are we going to do next year? Because it's going to be an absolute brand new look. And I know they want to finish out this year and hopefully try to win a championship. But frankly, it's going to be starting all over again next year. If you build it out of the portal, you're stuck in the portal, and that's what's going to happen at South Carolina. They had to get in there. It's the only way they could get the program back built up where they're competitive, and they've done a good job. Shane's done a remarkable job, but they're not going to have the same football team next year, and it might cost them $3 million to keep that young edge player. The quarterback, he's a different type kid. I don't think he'd want to leave, but they may have to give him a bunch of money because people are going to be calling, agents are going to be calling that, hey, they'll give him this over here, they'll give him this over there. So a lot of coaches better have a couple of these analysts they got running around, paying them to do nothing. Need 2 or 3 of them sitting in there already trying to figure out how we're going to replace these 10 kids because we know we can't afford to keep them.
Well, you've already got to do that. At this point in the year, that's what Hugh Freeze talked about this week, and it's not unique to Auburn. He's not some people freaked out, and of course because they're 3-6, and some people are critical right now. But it's not unique to Auburn and Hugh Freeze that he said they've already started recruiting their own roster. Those conversations have already started. Some of them include the coaching staff. A lot of them just include the NIL and personnel people. But as you mentioned, Ellis, it's just a different set of responsibilities for a coach having to already think ahead to next year. And you're always doing that.
That's right.
Because he said his exact quote, he said, we'd be foolish to think their phones aren't already ringing.
Yeah. I mean, and the signing date, don't remember that signing date less than a month away, isn't it?
And earlier there was
the high school signing date. Okay. So
yep.
You're doing that. And then I don't know when the portal starts. I know they can get in at a certain time, but they can't.
5 days after signing day.
Okay, they can actually jump to another school, or they can get in the portal. What is it?
They can get in the portal on December 9th.
Okay, and when can they take them? Before the next semester or something? I mean, I don't even know those things because I'm not dealing with it anymore. But they better be talking about it now. And I don't care if you're already 7-8 wins, or if you 7-8 losses right now. You better be talking about it, or you're going to be, looking at it in taillights.
Ellis, I want to ask you a question. I didn't realize this. I was talking to a coach last week, and they're on the quarter system, and the quarters don't line up with the end of the year. I mean, when I was in school at Auburn, we were on quarters, and the quarter ended in December. This particular coach was telling me that, and he's a head coach, but he was telling me that the quarter ends about 2 to 3 weeks before the season's over. So those conversations you would typically have with kids, you got to have them in the middle of the season, or with 2 games left in the season. Imagine having to manage that locker room.
Yeah, I know a little bit because I can remember seeing that when I was coaching at Alabama. Auburn would play 2 ball games in the fall. The student body wasn't back yet.
Yep.
And those guys live like pro football players all through the preseason and the first part of the season. They didn't have to worry about classes much. But anyhow, yeah, I mean, the whole calendar is so different than when I was coaching. So I don't know when they can be off campus. And I was over watching practice a couple of weeks ago and had to ask one of the coaches, when can y'all be off campus or whatever, because there was a kid there visiting, watching practice. But I don't know. I don't know when the portal is and signing dates and the off-campus recruiting and the official visits and on campus, all that starts. But yeah, I mean, it's just year round. And I mean, we've beaten it to death, but you better have 2 or 3 people in that staff that aren't out there having to coach every day that are looking at all these things ahead of time, because you can't plan if you don't have a plan.
That's right.
Yeah. Got a lot more than that, I think. I mean, these personnel, especially Auburn and big programs like that, I mean, their personnel departments are massive. And they'll bring in people just for stuff like that. So,
yeah.
Hugh Freeze said it. I mean, like, it comes to the coaches eventually. They're the one, they know the players, but they can't be wrapped up in that. It's preparing for a game week. I mean, it's just not.
No,
there's literally not enough hours in the day.
It was really hard just for somebody to come in and say, hey, I got a kid here at such and such high school, a junior. We got to get on him. If we don't, it'd be your position. They'd want you to take a look at him for about 20 minutes on film. I mean, that's hard to find 20 minutes in the middle of a game week where you can break away and get away from game planning or getting preparation for practice ready. So it's almost evolving towards where the pros are, where they got scouts out there that don't coach, and they got coaches that don't scout until the season's over, and then they'll go see the ones that are highly rated or whatever. And it's going to have to be something that nature uh, with all the changes in the recruiting. And I don't, and the main thing's the portal, all this transferring in and out all the time.
Let's Nathan, unless you got something else, I wanted to ask Ellis about some coaching changes. Is there anything else you want to cover on Auburn?
No, I don't think so. I think we can talk about that and then get into the schedule for this weekend.
So we got a handful of openings. I just want to kind of get your take on and none of them are SEC jobs yet, but right now you got Rice, East Carolina, Southern Miss open. But then you look at some of the bigger jobs. I mean, North Carolina can open. You got Baylor, USC. What in this environment is how important is fit? You look at Auburn, Brian Harsin didn't fit. I think Hugh Freeze does. What when you're getting ready to hire a coach and you're an AD, what are the things you look for?
Yeah, I don't know, and I think fit. If you're talking about fit into a geographical area, that's not really that big a deal anymore because kids travel more now, and also exposure. You know, programs where people didn't even know where they were. Young kids didn't know where something was located till they look at it on a map. Those days are over. And so distant recruiting now is more common than it used to be. On the other hand, you still got to get the bulk of your players are usually going to be within 200 miles of your school. So I think that's important. But we were chatting while we were watching practice today. Another high school coach was talking, and he was just talking about how uh, another coach, we won't say what school or anything, how well he had fit in there, and they should have kept him when they made the transition from one double A to the next level. And it all worked out good, but he would have been the best guy. But he was using that thing about he really fit in great at that. Well, I just said was he fit in great at Appalachian State, and so they moved to a younger guy, and we both thought it probably would have been a better decision to let him move it up for him. I think it's important. But I think it's less important these days than it used to be. And you'd be surprised if you go back and look. You'd be surprised where some of these coaches were. And, like I use Jackie Sherrill. Somebody called me the other day about heard him speak somewhere, and I got to know him a little bit. But he started up at Iowa State, did a heck of a job, and then came back, of course, to an area where he was more familiar with it. But a lot of coaches have coached in areas where they don't fit and done a super job because they're just good coaches and recruiters.
Well, you look at Nick Saban. I mean, he's from West Virginia and coached in the NFL, coached at Toledo and Michigan State as a head coach. And you look at Lou Holtz. I mean, he was everywhere. I mean, from NC State to Arkansas to the Jets to Notre Dame, and I think there's some more in there in between somewhere. But
yeah, and I don't know. I don't think it's a major thing. I really don't. I think the worst thing is when the coach comes in and he doesn't fit into the culture. And the culture, I mean, some programs. I would say this coach Mike White. He wasn't used to the scrutiny. Yeah, he was head coach at Washington State, and he told the SID, he said, "Man, when I had to recruit Southern California, they flew me down there. They didn't pick me up for a week or two to bring me back." He said, "Half the people I ate around or had a cold drink, they didn't know who I was and didn't care when I was around Los Angeles, California." Well, they flying him in and out on that jet at Tuscaloosa, and every night he's back on in town on the campus or down somewhere where he just wanted to have a beer or something with a couple of coaches, and next thing you know, it's a bad situation. It doesn't fit in. So there are some things that matter, but I think it's overblown.
Well, I think it matters with certain people. Mike Price is a good example. Brian Harsin is a good example. But I think you're right, 100%.
I tell you that the thing that I think sent a signal the other day was when Florida stepped up and said we're keeping Napier, and I frankly think it was the right decision. We had a bunch of Florida guys on our staff, with Carolina, and two or three of them we were texting, and they were ready for a change. but they're Gators. They're frustrated. I don't know what they get out of firing him and bringing in 15 more coaches. Hell, today
Well, I think,
bringing in 20, 25 coaches. It's becoming a financial problem, and boards and other people associated with institutions saying, look, we're not paying 3 or 4 people millions of dollars not to work here. And so unless they're damaging the program or they completely just lost total control, and I don't think that's the case in that situation. If it takes 2 more years to get it back up around the top of the conference, I don't think anybody else can come in there right now, wave a magic wand and do it any quicker. So I think that sent a little bit of a signal that this stuff's going to slow down a little bit now. And it may be a little bit like the pros, the coaches are going to end up making less and less, and they're going to get these contracts. Sexton and them will be fighting like hell. But some of these coaches, schools are going to say, we're not paying coaches these payout contracts, for 6 and 10 years on the contract. We're just not going to do it. He doesn't want the job. Then wait for the next big job. They'll get somebody that'll take it for a
absolutely.
2-year buyout. They'll give them a 2-year buyout instead of a 6-year contract with a 2-year buyout or something of that nature. Offset contracts, as y'all heard all that stuff. But it's going to slow down a little bit, man, because this thing that came down when they told them they had to start paying us back pay for these kids and all that. This stuff's getting ridiculous. What these schools are starting to have to pay, and Disney and them are going to put out the money on the TV contracts, but they're not going to run in there and pay off all your players. So at some point in time, and then wait, Title IX crew, wait till they roll in and want their cut. And it's just going to be a lot more difficult than people think. You hear all these big figures that are flowing in from TV contracts. You're like, man, they'll never spend all that money. Hell, half of it's owed before it gets to the campus.
There's no question, especially when you have buyouts like Auburn's had for the last 15, 20 years. I think another thing with Napier at Florida is, you remember Ben Sass, senator from Nebraska. He's the president down there. It was his wife is sick, and so he resigned. So they have no president. And then you've got an AD who may or may not be there with a new president. And so I think part of Napier's situation, and I think he deserved more time too, but I think part of the situation is you got no president and you don't know if the AD is going to be there. So you don't really want him hiring somebody else. So I think that was part of the reason on Napier. But
I was on one of these things the other day, and I didn't know the details quite as much, but y'all know even more detail. But I was there when some of it went on. But Auburn went, president resigns, interim president, back to the full-time president. He doesn't stay very long. He leaves, and what happens is they all have their different amount of interest in athletics. All of them care, but some of them really care, and they help you a little bit more. They put a little more emphasis on it, and that makes AD's job a hell of a lot easier. And when his job's easier, he maybe does a better job. And it makes a big difference. It certainly makes a huge difference at a small school like I went to, but it makes a big difference at big schools. You get one come in there and he doesn't care about sports, but he leaves you alone. The next one doesn't care about sports, and he's always trying to, push emphasis to other parts of the campus. Those kind of things can create some bad situations where incompetent or unqualified or undeserving people get hired. And then it isn't the fault of the person that took the job. It's the fault of the people that thought it was a good idea to offer him the job. And that, it happened at Auburn for about 10 years there. What was it, 4 different presidents in a 10-year period, basically.
Well, and it's been messed up at Auburn for a long time. I think, I was talking to somebody the other day. Florida and Auburn have been screwed up for a while. I think from a leadership standpoint, Auburn's gotten it fixed. Florida hasn't. And it's amazing to me that those two schools are staring at both of them at 4 consecutive losing seasons. It's hard to do that at one of them, much less both at the same time.
Yeah, it's amazing. It just shows how fragile these things are. It doesn't matter how much money you got, and how much tradition you got, doesn't matter how much history you got, doesn't matter how many fans you got come. All those things help you become a powerful program, but it's not automatic. And that's 2 great examples where it matters who in the hell you hire in these positions of leadership.
Well, and if you look at Auburn, like we were talking about before, I mean, it was one disastrous hire after another, whether it was president, down to AD, down to head coach. I mean, Stephen Leith, and Nathan could speak more on this than I can, but I mean, he comes in and says he's going to run athletics and turns around and hires Alan Green. And
he wants to fire the best coach on campus.
And he wants to fire Bruce Pearl. I mean, what did he lay
Right.
2 years? Is that right, Nathan?
Yeah, 2.5, something like that.
Yeah. Well, did Stephen Lee come down there with a gun and threaten him that he better get the job, or he thought he was going to kill everybody? How did he get there, Ronnie?
Well, because a guy named Raymond Harbert, who was on the board, pushed for him, and he was running the search. And that's
Said the key word, board.
Yep.
I mean, everybody has some kind of culpability and accountability in this thing, okay? And the guy that takes the job, he's accountable for what happens under his. He's not responsible for why he's there to start with. I mean, that's what I get. So listen to these people talk and everything. We need to get rid of him. We got to make a change. Who hired him? You did.
Well, you're talking about Alan Green, Ronnie. That's where I kind of get struck with him, is like, because he was a great dude, and personally, everybody loved Alan Green. But you mentioned, I think Ellis said, like, different priorities. He came here and wanted to spend money on other things. He wanted basketball players to take the bus to games instead of, well, maybe that would have been a good idea for them a few days ago to take a bus instead of a plane. But he wanted to cut costs in certain areas, and that just didn't work. But like Ellis is saying, and maybe you need to do a better job of communicating ahead of time. But like ultimately, they hired him to come in and do the job. He didn't do it how they wanted to, but it's not his fault he got the job.
Good.
Well, and we talked about fit earlier. I mean, when Leith got the president's job and he hires Allen, I mean, Leith planned on running football, and Leith gets fired, and all of a sudden it's in Allen's lap. But I mean, when you hire a guy who played baseball at Notre Dame to be the athletic director at Auburn, I mean, you kind of get what you got.
Sure.
That's right.
Sure. He started swimming. So.
Ellis,
well, y'all want to talk about this weekend's game? Sorry, Ronnie, I think I cut you off for a second.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing.
Well, we were talking before we got rolling, Ellis. I mean, the SEC standings are it's coming down to it, and we're recording this here on Tuesday evening before the playoff rankings. We'll see. And I know Auburn fans, but it's been out of the playoff picture for a while. But Georgia obviously fell to Ole Miss. That was a really big game for Georgia to get knocked down to 2 conference losses, and Ole Miss to stay alive and stay in a situation where they feel like they're there. But Tennessee, Georgia this weekend, Ellis, I just saw an injury update. Pete Thamel said Nico Iamaleava is in concussion protocol. And so that would be massive if Tennessee doesn't have him on Saturday. That's such a huge game for this race.
When was that? I saw something where Heupel said yesterday that he's in great shape and ready to go.
So, yeah.
So this has been since then?
This was 18 minutes ago. Pete Thamel said Iamaleava is in concussion protocol after leaving, blah, blah, blah. He did dress in practice on Tuesday, but his status is undetermined. Okay, so he did practice, but he's being evaluated for a concussion.
Well, Heupel,
I saw what Heupel said.
I thought he said that he was in great shape, and I didn't even know what he was talking about. I thought he must have got hurt the previous game or missed a game, and it just I didn't even know anything about it. But if he's in concussion protocol, that's not good.
Yeah, and I mean Georgia, they've been kind of up and down this year. They haven't been where they want to be, but as was shown in the Texas game, they have the capability to be the best in the team in the league.
They're the team until a couple of crazy things happened this last game, but they're the team that has a little bit of a team complexion where I know they got some portal guys in there, but that one has been built on bringing kids along and developing through outstanding recruiting classes. Now, they're notched down at a few places. Like I don't think their secondary is great. Their receiver core is not nearly what it used to be for the last 2 or 3 years, and they've got a really good quarterback, but he's not a Milrow that can run around and buy time or take off 50 yards for a scramble. But he is really a real good quarterback, and a lot of his talent is being shortchanged because I don't think he has great targets out there when you start playing those big time games. But it also to me look like they're getting a little bit worn down, and maybe they don't have fantastic depth. Man, they have run a gauntlet. After we look back on it, I think they've had the hardest SEC schedule. Everybody can predict them at the beginning of the year who's got a hard one. Just like Carolina and South Carolina thought they had just a gauntlet. Their schedule really didn't turn out to be that bad. Kentucky's not a good team this year, or Oklahoma's not a good team this year, and they've really played well and they deserve a lot of credit, but their schedule has not been what it looked like it was going to be. But Georgia's has been everything as advertised. And a lot of those games have had to be road games. So they have the toughness mentally and physically that they're the type that can do it. But I'm telling you, I'm worried about this game too. I was shocked when I looked at the point spreads, and I think the bookies have got this thing like Georgia over a touchdown favorite. I don't know if that's a home field or what. Maybe because the bookies don't think Emily was going to play. He hadn't been the key this year, though. I mean, he's played pretty average if you look at the statistics. Their defense is for real. I mean, they're in the top three in the country in stops. The other team gets a series and they don't even kick it a score or get a touchdown. And so they're for real and they'll travel. And so they got a good shot every game because their defense is so good. But I think that I don't know. I just favor Tennessee in this game a little bit because of their defense. Maybe I'm wrong.
Next, LSU Florida is going to be a big game. I'm interested in your take on a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, you had something uncommon happen. You had Brian Kelly leave a big job, Notre Dame, and go to LSU, and you had Lincoln Riley leave Oklahoma and go to USC. I'm looking at Brian Kelly's record here since he's been at LSU, 10-4, 10-3, 6-3. I mean, that's great. He won 10 games, but LSU wants to win championships.
Yep. And I think he's done a good job. And you talk about that word fit. I mean, they've had everybody win championships down there from Ed Orgeron. He was a great fit. I mean, he was half Cajun. But it all ends up, they won him one too. And he kept him at the top a little bit. And all of a sudden it went crazy. Nick Saban won there big. Of course, when he left to go to pros. But he talked about it. He's a West Virginia guy, came down from Michigan State, never coached anywhere in the South. And he won there big. And then I am having a hard time right now. Who? Miles. I mean, everybody had a comment, a critical comment about Les Miles all the time. Well, all he did was win, and he won a championship. So you can do it a lot of different ways at LSU, but it just seems like nobody can stay there very long. It'll drive them friggin' nuts. But I remember back way in the 80s, we played down at LSU the last game of the season. We had to play those Rascals after Thanksgiving. We were going 3 ball games so far. I don't know what they were going to. They had a good team. They had won 8 or 9 games. We're talking to one of the assistant coaches, talking about, none of us had ever gotten to coach at that level yet. We're just talking about how, man, this has got to be a great, great job and all this kind of thing. He said it's great with football practice, but he said you don't want to live here. So we're like, man. So anyhow, it's just, I don't know. LSU's LSU, and it'll always will be. And doesn't matter who comes in there, they're not going to change the place. I think Kelly's done a good job, but his defense is not real quality this year. They started to get better, but the last couple of weeks they've been exposed by mobile quarterbacks. And then, they've had some really great quarterbacks come through. And Nussmeier's a damn good one, but he's not a great one. And once again, he's a kid that is not that mobile. And I mean, he's mobile, but he's not a dangerous runner. And so he takes a lot of hits. So I do support. It's an important game for both programs for different reasons. We've already talked about the only one that I think can affect the playoffs, and that was Tennessee, Georgia. But yeah, I agree with you. This is a big game for both programs.
And this is a little bit out of the conference, but I did want to get your thoughts. In the same vein as Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma to go to USC. Since his record is Oklahoma 12-2, 12-2, 12-2, 9-2, 10-2, and since he's been at USC, 11-3, 8-5, 4-5.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have empirical evidence. When I just kind of look at it, Southern Cal to me is not going to be ever what it used to be as far as this perennially dominant program. And I don't know how to put my finger on it. I just think they're in a culture, they're in an environment, and it's a private school with all this, you know, they got all kind of problems with letting kids in school, not even athletes, that telling them they're going to be athletes and all that. They got all kind of stuff going on around that school that has nothing to do with athletics, but I think is a huge distraction. And I don't know. I mean, we know he's a really good offensive football coach, but he's never, ever been the head coach of a football team that had a decent defense.
No.
When I say decent, I'm talking about playing up at the top 10, 15 in the country. If you can do that at South Carolina, then damn, you can do it at Southern Cal. Don't tell me about personnel. I think it's the way they practice. I think it's a lot of times they can't help it when the coach's offense, his recruiting will tilt that way a little bit, and his practices will tilt that way a little bit. Thank goodness Coach Malzahn ran a physical style of offense because our practices, it was very difficult for me. It might not be for someone else to really have a really good defense on the field that Saturday that I knew was ready to play. And the reason is we did hardly any work good on good during the week. And I think you can get good on offense doing that because a lot of offense is timing, depth, a lot of things of that nature. But defense, you can't get better unless you've got a really good player that you're reacting to, whether it's pass coverage or whether it's getting off blocks or anything else. And I think if you watch, one of the things that deteriorates as the season goes along is tackling. If you watch it during the course of the year, you'll see teams get better and better running their offenses. You'll see more exotic blitzes coming from defenses, and everything's looking better from the system. But to me, the fundamentals on defense sometimes start sliding, and the reason is you can't work on them the way you do in the preseason and in the spring. It's just natural. You got the greatest players. You don't need to work fundamentals, but if you don't, you need fundamentals. But I really do, and I don't mean it as a criticism. I mean it's a choice. If you don't want to be a program that is built on defense, then run the program the way he runs it. Because I think it's just something that is hard to measure if people never played the game or coached the game. But your practices and your recruiting can start to get slanted a little bit. And it's very hard for an offensive coach not to take another 4 or 5 star wide out when you need another linebacker.
You're 100% right. And I remember one thing you said to me when you were concerned about taking the job to begin with. But, I remember you saying an offense like that rots your defense. And you just explained why.
Yeah. And it wasn't only that. I mean, there were other things too that were my responsibility. But that's what I had been used to, even with Coach Spurrier. I mean, we had a period every Tuesday. It was a meat grinder. Wasn't 5 or 10 minutes, but every week. And our kids were tough kids.
It doesn't take a lot, but you got to have some of them.
Yep.
Who do you have on LSU Florida this week?
I think LSU will win. Just Florida. I don't know how Florida's going to be able to, get through the rest of it with that third quarterback. But it has helped them that they've, had time now to give him the practice work. But Lord mercy, I mean, it's just a huge drop off, and he's a total change from Lagway. And that has been three drastic changes. Mertz was one style, then you got Lagway, it's a different style, and now you got your 13 quarterback. I think he's going to have to start. Isn't that correct?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Lagway could come back, but I just don't think it's.
The last thing I saw, he was a very slim possibility.
I think that's what I read too.
Anyhow, they'll get him back before the end of the season. Maybe they can finish with a couple of wins. But we're talking about being important. It's not important for the SEC. But if they could somehow miraculously grab them 2 more wins and get in a bowl, I mean, that'd be a good turnaround. And he needs that, especially after they decide to keep him, get a little something positive happen before the end of the year.
Before we let you go, South Carolina, Missouri.
Well, it's probably, again, nobody around the SEC cares who wins it, but I think it's important to both programs because Eli had gotten his program up to really competing with the very top level, and quarterback's been beat up, and then they've had something else happen during the course of the year that I think really hurt them. But if they get Burden going, and if that Cook kid can get healthy and play, and they really good offensively, they might can win this game on the road. South Carolina really good on defense, and the young kids not turning the ball over right now. They got a good chance now to win 9 games, and finish out with 3 wins in a row, because after this, they've got Wofford. And then they play Clemson. It's at Clemson, but they play Clemson at Clemson. And South Carolina's playing their best football of the season right now. And Clemson's playing, they're not playing the best football they've played this year. They're kind of getting a little bit off their kilter and they're not playing the best ball. So now Clemson bounced back and kicked Pittsburgh's butt. They've got Citadel. So they both have a 1AA opponent to come into that game. So there's a lot of riding on South Carolina. They came off a losing season last year and got a chance to turn it around and get in a real good bowl. So it is important to both programs. Not a lot of people in the SEC are going to be biting their fingernails about it.
Should be a pretty good game, though.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you being with us again.
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
Enjoyed it. Always fun, guys.
All right.